Let's party.
Hello! 1 second to get that right. Hello, welcome to Party Loaded, video gaming podcast. We're going to chat about everything that is great in the world of video games, and today we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. It has been a very, very busy time. So anyway, before we get into that, my name is Luke Retallick. We have the usual crew here tonight. We have on the right, Christian Paulson Brown. On the bottom right, we have Matt, the Game Father Diet, and we have
Game Father.
yeah, sure, a little bit more formal than usual. Why not? Adrian Chair, right below me. Gents, what's going on? How you doing?
Good. Hello. How are we?
I'm good. It feels like it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked about current stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
definitely.
And like
We like sultanas and raisins.
Okay.
Sure, that's
Or like electrical stuff, like
Yeah, that's what I prepared for.
wattage and amperage.
yeah. It's been pretty shocking the amount of things that have come out that we haven't had a chance to talk about.
We're really raising the bar.
That pun was great. Anyway,
That was
all right. Anyway,
We're gonna have a sultana fun.
I don't know about that. I'm not sold on that one.
That was pushing it, but I liked it.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah. Everything's fine. All right. So, so who are we going to start with tonight? Let's move into some this week in gaming. So, I want to throw to Adrian tonight.
Oh,
let's do the thing. What have you been playing this week, man?
cool. So I have been playing, no surprise, Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically
And Sword and Shield? Yeah.
No, just Shield.
Sword and Shield.
Like,
Before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention that I did play Outer Worlds. Just before Shield came out, I've still been going hard on Street Fighter, which has been great. But I played a little bit of Outer Worlds, just as I was, wanting to do something on my PC in the downtime from play Street Fighter. I got bored once I got, about 20 hours in. So it was
20
good.
hours?
Probably about 20 hours. It's still really good. And I feel like I would enjoy it in the right mind space, but I'll probably have to come back to it. I just feel like it started to kind of feel really repetitive to me. It wasn't sort of stimulating me enough. Anyway, Outer Worlds aside, Pokemon Shield. Where to begin?
Can I get you to begin with why did you pick Shield?
Okay, I picked Shield because I knew Christian was getting Sword. Is the main reason. And that's probably the only reason. And I figured anything that's different about the game, let's face it, it's mainly just which Pokemon are in the game. I could just trade them and get whatever I wanted anyway. So that's the main reason. So I ended up picking Shield. I will start by saying I think it's bad. I think Pokemon Sword and Shield are bad. That's where that's the tone I'm setting. This is the tone. And we're going to stay at that kind of level of malaise. And Christian may involve himself in the conversation, and I think he will have plenty to say too.
I'll just say at the moment I agree.
Yeah. So I guess what do people want to know without spoilers? I mean, I don't want to spoil what's in the game.
Well, I guess the position where I think a lot of people are going to be coming from listening to this is that the general sentiment online, for the most part, appears to be fairly positive. So I'm wondering where the rub's going to be there.
I'd say it's critically positive. I don't know about
a
lot of the fan base. But.
Yeah, look, I would say that most of the negative attention I think Sword and Shield has gotten is from like Dexit and the issue about like all those massive amount of Pokemon not being in the game.
Yeah.
I actually have no issue with that. I don't have any problem with that because I've never played new Pokemon games for old Pokemon. I've always been really excited way back from when Gold and Silver first came out. It blew my mind that they just brought out a whole bunch of new Pokemon. I remember like memorizing all the original 150 Pokemon off by heart and could like recite it like the alphabet. And then when they brought out new ones, and then when they brought out new ones, I was like, "Whoa, hang on, what?" Like there's a whole bunch of new ones. And ever since they did that, every time they've done it, that's been the most exciting part of Pokemon games for me, is seeing what's new. And Sword and Shield does that okay. There's not as many new ones as I would like. In fact, I think there's like not as many as there have been in other titles.
There's not. People won't mind if I say how many there are, will they?
I don't think there's
81 new Pokemon.
Okay.
81, which sounds like a lot, but when you're talking in the greater scheme of how many Pokemon already exist, what are we, over 400 now?
Is that incorporating the new Galarian forms of some of the existing ones?
Yes, that's including Galarian forms.
Okay.
Yeah, which there aren't that many of anyway. There's like only like 10 or something of that. So, look, so that's disappointing straight off the bat, is that there aren't that many new Pokemon. And of course, in each new generation of Pokemon, there's shithouse Pokemon within that group. And which ones are shit vary depending on the player. But you can generally agree that the ones in the starting area are usually kind of shit, and then they get better later into the game usually. And it's because they've followed the same formula since inception of like, there's a crappy little bird, there's a crappy little bug.
I like the birds.
I would say in the case of the new ones that Wooloo to me would be the one that stands out as being pretty average, but a lot of people seem to like Wooloo. To me, it's just freaking Mareep again, you know?
Yeah, look, this is what I mean about how it varies person to person.
Yeah.
But I think like it's hard to strike that balance between nostalgia and whatnot, because for young people playing Pokemon for the first time, this will be their Gen 1 and they'll love all of them. So like, who am I to say what's good and what's bad? Personally, I haven't gotten a buzz out of this current group of Pokemon. So Pokemon aside, funny to say that considering they're, you know, the main focus of the game. The game itself is really like shallow and kind of undercooked, I feel. Christian drew a really good comparison earlier today when we were chatting, saying that it's similar to Indivisible, which I talked about earlier, about how it just feels kind of undercooked, underdeveloped. There's sort of dead ends, and like there's not a lot of complexity and not a lot of depth to the game. And I'm basically near the end. So yeah, I mean, the gym battles, which are like the boss battles in the game, they're so easy. They're all pushovers. None of the routes to get anywhere in the game, like none of the areas you navigate are difficult. There's no complexity to it. It's a very kind of like baby's first Pokemon sort of experience, which to someone who's been playing Pokemon his whole life is also disappointing. So, and that's the main thing that sort of makes it terrible. The biggest letdown are these wild areas that they've sort of championed as being like the new kind of hook for this sort of generation of Pokemon.
The new Safari Zone sort of thing, or
it's kind of like that. So what it is, the game is, and there's not even that many of them. The game, like most original Pokemon games, are like a series of towns that you travel between, and the routes that you take between each town are often themed. Like there's a desert area, a snow area, a forest area, whatever they might be. Some of these areas often have like people that want to fight you as you move through the areas, and you have to fight them before you can go forward. Things like this. What they introduced in this version of the game are these large open areas where you can even move the camera around sort of freely, kind of like a third person over the shoulder.
Isn't it? It's just one continuous area, right?
Maybe you're right. I thought there was another. Yeah, you're right.
No, right. It's one area. Yeah,
that's true. It's one area. It's split up into sort of sections. So it's one big area. It's decent in size, but there's nothing in it. Just like grass and Pokemon wandering around. The only thing that you can do in these areas are another feature they've added, which are these raid battles, these Dynamax battles, where scattered around this big open area, there are these little honeycomb-looking objects that you interact with. If it's currently lit up, it means that there's a Dynamax battle that can happen there. You can then connect with other Pokemon players and fight a giant Pokemon together in teams of 4. But it's boring and lame, and there's nothing interesting about it at all. And like, you're meant to be able to get certain rewards, and you're meant to be able to catch the Pokemon, but who gives a shit when the first one I ran into was a Butterfree.
Yeah.
Like, who gives a shit?
The Pokemon in the raids aren't unique. It's that they have their Gigantamax form. So it's the only way to get their Gigantamax forms. But that's so hardly used anyway.
I heard that there was a schedule associated with some of the stuff that's going to be coming up in those raids soon.
Yeah.
So
it's a live service thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's disappointing because Christian will talk more about why it's disappointing actually when he talks about it. But I wasn't a big fan, not very good, not very interesting, and that's reflected through the rest of the game. So, unfortunately, the experience has been fine because it's still Pokemon, but that's all that's really carrying it for me. So that's my experience with Sword and Shield. The only last thing I'll mention is that I am locked in a bit of a Twilight Zone experience.
Completely of your own doing.
Yes, it's my own fault. So you guys know what shiny Pokemon are.
Oh, God. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, way back when Pokemon was on the Game Boy Color, I think it was when they first introduced it, there's a 1 in 8,000 chance to 1 in 8,000 each time you run into a Pokemon for it to be a shiny version of itself.
Yeah.
And all it means is a color swap, like a palette swap. But they're really rare. They're quite coveted for no reason other than to toot your own horn online or to show other people, look at my shiny Pokemon.
They're really quite good for trading online.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm sure people love trading them online.
Yeah, well, if you want to get hold of some of the really hard to find Pokemon of previous generations, like the legendary ones that you can only get on certain titles, that was a good way. Or event Pokemon, that was a good way to get them.
Yeah.
So.
The old trade system is full of hacked shinies anyway.
That's true, yeah. Unlike Pokemon Go, where you can get a shiny if you sneeze on your mobile phone, in the mainstream Pokemon games, they've always been really, really rare. Through my years and years of playing Pokemon, I've only ever found 4 or 5 shinies across every game that's ever existed. But each game usually has some sort of mechanic where you can increase your odds of finding a shiny, and they've varied from generation to generation. I won't go on about it a lot, but basically at the moment I'm stuck in a loop of farming for a shiny Pokemon, and I've been updating Christian on how many tries I've had, and long story short, in this generation of Pokemon, the way to shiny chain, which is to increase your odds of shinies, is to fight the same Pokemon over and over again, and only that Pokemon.
Yeah, there was a similar thing in the last game as well, where you had well, no, not in Go, in Sun and Moon, where you had those 5 it was the 5-on-1 battles, and also the ones where they could bring in
battles.
they could bring in a reinforcement.
Yeah.
If you could chain those, it increased the chance of the shinies to
so this is different because that eventually came to a point where you were guaranteed a shiny. This system doesn't work that way. It's still the best it will juice it down to is a 1 in 1,000 chance, roughly 1 in 1,000, which is still astronomical. So I've been doing that anyway, and the Pokedex does keep track of how many of a Pokemon you've fought. Currently, the one that I'm farming, it's run out of numbers and it's up to 999, and it won't go any higher. But I know that I've chained at least 1,200 of this Pokemon in a row, and I don't have a shiny yet. And because your save file gives you a timestamp, it's currently up to 16 hours that I've been farming this.
16 hours just farming that.
Why would you do this to yourself?
I can't stop. I can't stop now. I've committed mentally to it.
Do we need to have a Pokemon intervention?
I do.
It's been 4 days and 16 hours.
I know, Adrian. He's just going to keep doing it.
Over 1,200 Pokemon until I get it.
This is the gambler's fallacy right here.
It is. No, because I'm not
addicted. I can stop anytime I want.
This isn't a gamble. The next one could be the shiny.
I'm aware of how stupid the odds are. But, you guys know my personality. We talked about it in our Redux episode. I have the tenacity to just keep doing it until I don't want to do it anymore. So I will, and we'll see how we go. Anyway, Christian.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add a few thoughts. So you mentioned the routes are crappy. They totally are. So in previous generations, the routes were much more detailed. There were more twists and turns and levels, and there were more interactive elements. Because they had the HM system, there were trees to cut down, there were boulders to push, there were areas to surf and dive and go up waterfalls. And there's none of that in Sword and Shield, because there's no HMs. There's no interactive elements other than surfing. That's the only one. And even surfing, there's only 2 or 3 spots in the game that once you get the ability to surf, you can actually go back and discover something. And there's nothing interesting to discover. There's no interesting Pokemon or hidden areas at all. In previous generations, it wasn't just towns and routes. They would have like other areas, like a factory or like a mansion in the middle of a route that just there was like a ghost in there or something. There's none of that. All there is in this game is the routes and the towns. Previous generations, there were even towns without gyms that were just like extra areas that added life to the world. None of that in this. And
very little world building, I found.
Very little world building. It's very straight line. One arrow here to collect a collect a TM. One arrow here to collect a TM or like a random item, and that's it. It's very straightforward. And also performance-wise, I've got some issues with the game too. There's a lot of people have pointed out the pop-in, but it's not just in the overworld that there's pop-in. There's pop-in in the battles too. Like I've noticed there are some moves that my Pokemon do where consistently every single time as the animation starts up, the trainer behind the enemy Pokemon will disappear. And then when the animation finishes, the trainer pops back and appears again. And it just looks ugly. And there's a little bit of frame rate slowdown. Digital Foundry did a video breaking that down. Basically, every time you enter a battle or every time the camera in the battle does like a split screen and shows you two sides, it drops to 20 FPS. And especially in the wild area, when you turn on the online function in the wild area, it basically populates it with like random ghosts of other players, kind of like Dark Souls. You'll see just like another player randomly zip by on a bike or just run by. But the animations are always super stiff and like characters just popping in, popping out. It's dropping your frame rate down. It looks super ugly. It doesn't make you feel like immersed in the world. It's just an annoying distraction. So yeah, I'm just disappointed in the game. I'm still enjoying it because it is Pokemon. But yeah, disappointed overall.
Yeah.
I think move it. Well, I was going to say move it back to the GS, but Switch is replacing that.
I was almost going to say like 3D Pokemon's a mistake. I don't really like the Switch to 3D.
It doesn't sound like the 3D is the problem though. It sounds like some of the basic stuff is what's been left behind in favor of the new platform. So.
Yeah, but I think that ever since the switch to 3D, there's been like a higher expectation that other things in the game will kind of scale to match the improved graphics, like the design and everything will follow along and improve too. But I don't think it has. So like so Sword and Shield still has the same story structure, the same kind of really simple canned animations. Like every cutscene, it's your character standing there, the other character runs up from off screen, says something, runs off from off screen. Very like simple structure, and that kind of stuff flew okay on a handheld, but and even in 2D it worked a lot better. But switching it over to a home console, that sort of stuff that you could get away with now that there's a higher fidelity on the graphics overall look quite nice. Like the texture work and the lighting is quite nice, but it's all the stuff surrounding it that hasn't kind of followed along in scaling up with it, in my opinion, and stuff's actually gone worse. So
yeah, it's like the visuals have gone that way and the gameplay's gone backwards. Like the gameplay's worse than it's ever been. Like there's nothing, like unequivocally when you play the game, it's quantifiably worse than any other Pokemon game. Like there are less features than even the original.
Not the original, but
yeah, I don't know.
Maybe
anyway,
since Ruby Sapphire, I'd say
it's kind of crazy. It's kind of, and the only thing that comes to mind is either A, it was rushed, which is probably likely, and B, they've just decided to like focus more on like new players maybe and just not, I don't know, not address the kind of historical.
That sounds like that's the impression that I get. Like they're focusing way more on new players, and hearing you like the complaints about the difficulty. My first thought is like, it'd be amazing if Pokemon had difficulty modes. Right?
Oh yeah,
Black and White
like,
2
that'd be
that's
so good.
There's easy mode and hard mode, but
okay,
yeah, like returning to that would be a really, really good idea for them. But yeah, it does seem like this is their first entry on a console, and so they're going for a new audience potentially, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I personally feel like every generation of Pokemon is like Adrian said, it's
somebody's first.
It's somebody's first, and I don't think there's any real justification for like marking this as more of a first for people than previous generations have.
Yeah,
so.
That's certainly not my argument.
I think it's the hardware. I think it's the switch to it's developing on a new console and having higher expectations, and maybe that's led to time or budget constraints or something. I don't know.
the biggest issue I have is that like the building blocks are all there. Like when you play the game, that there's no, it's like they made like a tree and they only gave it like 4 branches, but they have all the tools to make like a full tree with leaves and many branches, and they just didn't.
Yeah.
That's what I find frustrating, is that like if you look at the footage that's playing right now on the stream, the game looks amazing, but if you were to remove all the visual noise, it would literally be a line down the middle with one line going off to the side, and those are your 2 paths in that game. Like it's almost like it's lying to you with like what it's presenting. It's presenting the promise of like an open world and like a beautiful Pokemon experience. But when you play it, it's really, really boring. Like I just feel kind of lied to, and not because of the marketing and not because of leading up to the game, but when you play the game, it feels dishonest. It just doesn't feel like you're getting anything out of it that it was promised. And the fact that like all the character animations, they're no better than anything that was done on the 3DS. There's no character animation or cutscene or visual. Even some of the Pokemon attacks are like ugly and bad.
There's
like,
that one cutscene when they introduce the starters and they're like jumping around. That's the one cutscene that has like, it's like almost from an anime or something. But that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and like there's a good example where like I can't remember the move it was, but my Pokemon went like this. It went, and then poof, and there was a particle effect, and that was the move. And I was like, hang on, like I would expect that on a Game Boy Advance. What the fuck am I playing? Like,
that does sound like a carryover from like the handheld generation, right? On handhelds, it's like that was just Pokemon. So
and previously the argument of Dexit of saying that like, oh, we can't do all the Pokemon because we're trying to make a better game. Now that I've played it, that's bullshit. Now I side with the argument that that's a load of shit. Like
but Adrian, the curries, they had to get the curries in.
The curry is a perfect example of a nothing system.
The whole camping system.
I've done it once, the curries. Once. There's no point. Like there's no point to the curries. They just have no point in the game. They were trying to do a Breath of the Wild thing. They were trying to be like, ooh, people loved cooking in Zelda. They'll love it in Pokemon. No, it's shit. Like, it's absolute shit. So anyway, like, if the game was as it is, with every single Pokemon that ever existed in it, maybe I could forgive it. Because then you could say they spent their time elsewhere. But the fact that they didn't spend that time developing all those Pokemon and instead put out a substandard game, not good enough for me. Sorry.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, well, let's move on to another game that's hopefully not substandard. So, Adrian, did you play anything else this week? Was that pretty much the big thing for you?
Yeah, no, that's it.
That's it?
Are you alluding to...
No, I'm just checking because I know that Christian played something else which we'll come back to because I feel like that might be a bigger discussion. But I want to throw to Matt for his thing now because this is a game that I'm very interested to learn about and I know fucking nothing about this thing. So, Matt, what the hell is going on with Disco Elysium?
Disco Elysium's good.
Yeah.
That's what's going on with Disco Elysium. See, like... Is it
based off that movie Elysium with Matt Damon?
I don't know, maybe. No, Disco Elysium. So in Disco Elysium, you play a detective in the middle of a murder investigation, and he wakes up after a night of getting completely shit-faced, and he cannot remember a thing. He has no memory of his past. He has no memory of the murder investigation. He doesn't even remember he's a detective, but he remembers like facts and such. And basically, you're thrust into this situation where apparently you have a history of being kind of a dickhead. And so everybody's just like, it's just him doing this dumb crap again. And that you basically have nobody believing you. You just have to get on with this murder investigation where you can't remember shit. And it's really, really fucking good. Like, it's doing this thing I'm seeing a lot of games doing at the moment where it takes really cool concepts from other games and then mashes them together in a really fascinating way. So like this is if Baldur's Gate and a Telltale game had a baby and you played in that kind of top-down like perspective of a Baldur's Gate game but had no combat. And everything was just kind of like dialogue and interactions, but there's still a skill system and you kind of spec yourself into like what sort of detective you want to be. So you can be a detective that's super strong. You can be a detective that has really high reflexes. You can be a detective that talks to people really well. You can be a detective that's super smart. And so I kind of built myself a super smart detective that was good at talking to people, but was like just not very healthy and not very fast. And yeah, there's a couple of things that are super interesting about it in terms of like the intelligence and the charisma stuff. Well, actually, no, all of the skills like have these really interesting side effects where you can spec into like sub skills. So like under intelligence, you have a skill that is sort of like, you know how in CSI they kind of visualize what happened in a crime scene.
Oh, it's like the Arkham vision kind of thing. Yeah.
You have a skill where you can visualize what happened here. Like, okay, so bullet trajectory. Let's theorize as to where the bullet came from. So I spec'd my character into kind of being like really fucking good at that. But it has this interesting kind of system where like if you have very little points in that thing, like it'll randomly make you do checks sometimes, and so you'll just fail at that check, and it influences your dialogue options. But if you become really good at that thing, it also influences your dialogue options, and not always in a good way. So like you can get kind of stuck. Like there's one of the skills is like this. You've got this encyclopedic memory. So you have. I probably actually should have started with this part. You have this amazing inner dialogue, just with these little components of your brains. Like your encyclopedic knowledge will actually pipe up every now and then and be like, when this person's talking about this, it's actually meaning this thing. Your ancient lizard brain is a character that you constantly have dialogue with. Your limbic system is a character that you constantly have dialogue with. Like you quite often when you go to sleep, like the dream sequences is basically you having dialogue with how fucked up your body is right now because you're hungover and hurting. But all the skills you level up and everything like that is also basically a dialogue like inside your head. And this can lead to really interesting and kind of, it's a balance, right? Like you don't want to go so far into your encyclopedic knowledge that that's all you are, because then that's the only way that you can talk to people is rattling off useless facts. And yeah, so like that kind of character creation and management is super cool. There's these really cool kind of it's like a mind palace. I can't remember what they actually call it in the game, but you get delivered like a fact or a problem to solve. And you can set it up, and it's like a perk essentially, where it's like I'm going to think about this thing for a while, and then after a couple of hours of real time in the game, because you have a limited number of days to solve the case, you'll have an epiphany about this thing you're thinking about, and it will change how your character acts, or it will give you like a skill bonus or something like that. And it's really, really neat. Like there's so much about this game that just like it takes all those RPG mechanics and then molds it together with just a brilliantly written detective narrative that, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
I really like the idea of a time sort of pressure when you're doing detective activities. I think that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like the person that got murdered is part of this mercenary company. And it turns out that his friends are still around. And they're planning on getting revenge. And so you need to solve the case and give them a proper target. Because if you don't solve it in time, then it's going to be a bloodbath. The game gets massively political because, like, there's a union, and it turns out the mercenaries are kind of being hired by this hyper neoliberal group that are like massive capitalists. And so it's basically the potential start of this uprising. It's really, really fascinating. You kind of decide a lot of stuff, like, so you could become a superstar cop, which is like you just constantly are acting like you're hot shit, essentially.
Like
Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
But you could also be like sad cop, apocalyptic cop.
That's me. I'm sad cop.
You could be sorry cop, like you keep on apologizing.
I'll be sad and sorry cop.
Sad and sorry cop.
Is apocalyptic cop like Judge Dredd? Is that what we're going?
Apocalyptic cop is basically like you're just fucking your body, essentially. Like
so Riggs from frickin' Lethal Weapon.
Yeah. But then you also have like all of these political systems. So like you can be a communist, and when you talk about communist, it's like the cartoonish version of a communist, where in conversations you can't shut up about killing people that are running businesses, and artists
Landlords.
should be sent off to murder the landlords and send the artists off to work encampments and all this shit. Like it's the super cartoony versions. The game's brilliant. I really cannot recommend it enough. It was so good I couldn't put it down. I finished it over the weekend, start to finish.
How many hours?
Random.
Would you say?
Sorry.
I can actually tell you right now. Apparently, 29 hours, start to finish.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was going to say, random Disco Elysium fact. Matt, do you know the original name of the game?
I don't know the original name of it.
The original name of Disco Elysium was No Truce with the Furies, but people kept confusing it for No Truce with the Furries.
See,
that's an amazing name. I love that name. Yeah.
That's completely true as well. They changed it. No Truce with the Furies.
I'm not going to get all philosophical, but the name Disco Elysium, when you actually learn a bunch of stuff in the game world, it's kind of spoilery if I actually said why, but like the name Disco Elysium is so fucking good.
I don't mind
so much about it. Just ruin it.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
So how many hours in? How many hours in do you have to get before you start brokering that truce with the furries?
I didn't see a single furry in that game.
Okay,
That's why they changed
A
it.
single one.
the art style looks dope. I reckon it looks really cool. Yeah,
the art is incredible. There's the art for all the perks is this really warped, kind of melty. I'm trying to think of the artist that kind of reminds me of but it looks like art. Like it looks like it should be in an art gallery.
this probably won't mean much to you, Max. I don't know if you would recognize the artist, but Adrian and Christian, you'd remember John Blanche. It looks like very Blanche style.
Okay,
art.
Adrian hates John Blanche.
Yeah,
I hate John Blanche.
yeah.
I like John Blanche.
I like what he did for the tone, but I don't like the art.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant. The game art, both in world and in the perk system and everything, it's just absolutely fantastic.
Nice.
But yeah, outside of that, I actually also finished Outer Worlds. Everybody that said that game's short, fuck you. It took me 62 hours to finish Outer Worlds.
Wow.
And that's 100%. That's everything in the game. I did not have a single subquest.
I could tell just from the small amount I played it wasn't going to be short.
It's not a short game.
Yeah.
And there were so many people bitching about it. I'm still keen to actually go back and play it, but now I think I'm actually going to go back and play Disco Elysium first.
The quickest playthrough of Outer Worlds that I've heard, I think it's been upwards of the high 20s in terms of hours.
Yeah.
And that would have been main mining. Yeah.
One of my students was claiming that he had a friend that finished it in 15 hours. And that was the entire game and doing everything. And I'm like, that's bullshit.
Had a friend?
He had a friend.
He had to make a tough choice during the game.
He finished it quickly, but then he died.
Wow. Matt, let me ask you, have you also been fucking with the Force this last week?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have. I have only a little bit, but I want to hear your opinions on it first because I'm going to talk about it a tiny bit.
All right. So, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, I picked up on release day and started playing almost immediately. I haven't gotten super far. I'm probably only about 10 hours in, so I've got quite a bit left to go. Opening impressions of the game are pretty good. I'm enjoying it a lot. I think that in terms of Star Wars games, it is certainly a good one of those. When we've had many, many years of not good ones of those. So, yeah. But in terms of game feel, this is to me, it's a very Tomb Raider reboot feeling Star Wars game. And I've heard people sort of say it's a mishmash of a whole bunch of modern style games. Like there's definitely a bit of God of War in there. There's a bit of Uncharted in there in terms of some of the way that you traverse some of the obstacles and the movement and the character sort of animations and interactions. And I could see it. I think that they're all very...
I've heard there's some Dark Souls as well.
Yeah, I'll get onto that, actually. I wouldn't say Dark Souls. I'd actually say Sekiro, specifically.
Okay.
I think it's a lot more Sekiro in this game, particularly in terms of the lightsaber combat, because it's got the similar kind of poise mechanic with regards to the parrying. So you can sort of get through the enemies. I forget the exact term that they use in this game for it, but it's essentially the same mechanic. It's exactly the thing that I know you like. The whole, the stance thing where you break through that and then you can sort of, do your damage sort of phase kind of thing, which is good and bad. Like, I think with lightsaber combat, I think the thing that a lot of people who are Star Wars fans desire is to be able to get into fights with things like stormtroopers and just dispatch them in an instant, because you're cutting through them with a fucking laser sword. You should be able to just cut them in half. And for the most part, a lot of those sorts of enemies you can dispatch fairly quickly.
Do they get cut in half though? Do they actually get?
They do sort of.
I've heard all non-humans do.
Yeah,
all animals.
You sort of like stormtroopers in particular. You carve across the chest, like you might get them sort of around the belly or the waist sort of area, and you can see the burn line where they fall over. But it's not like their body falls apart in pieces. Like,
so it's Disney Star Wars, of course. Yeah,
pretty much.
That was like in the what was it called?
Clone Wars or
Rebels,
Star Wars Rebels. Similar in Star Wars Rebels, that was like, because in Clone Wars they just fucked everyone up in the animated Clone Wars series, but then when in Rebels, people took noticeably less damage when they got hit by a lightsaber.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good system, but where it kind of falls apart a little bit is when you're fighting enemies that are much bigger, like some of your mini bosses or your bosses in particular, any non-humanoid bosses specifically. Like, I think when you're fighting humanoid bosses like the Inquisitors that are in the game, like the black-clad kind of force users that are hunting you essentially, like the combats that you have with them are very technical in nature and involve a lot of sort of diving and ducking around and sort of learning the moves and that kind of stuff, which is cool. And that kind of thing I really enjoy. Yeah. What?
No, I'm just sorry.
But when you're fighting like some of the big beasties, as there are in this game, like there's a lot of stuff out in the wild as well. Like it's just an attrition thing where you're just carving through them with a lightsaber, and it breaks the immersion for me because it's not.
Did you say nutrition?
No.
Nutrition thing.
No,
attrition.
Attrition.
Oh, attrition. Sorry,
it's not a nutrition thing. No, you're not in a boss. You're not in a boss fight where you're running underneath them and trying to milk them or something like that to get the nutritious blue milk. No. That kind of stuff sort of breaks a little bit, but the rest of the game is really cool. The other thing I'd say about the game is I'm having a shitload of fun with it, but it is lacking a significant amount of polish in some areas. So I think that there's areas where there's a bit of texture popping when you sort of are panning around sides of rooms and things like that, where you sort of clip a corner and you can sort of see through it and it doesn't sort of do what it should be doing in terms of the camera. There's bits where I've been running across the surface and my feet are sort of floating above the floor a little bit, and you can kind of notice it depending on what angle you're on, which is like, kind of forgive it to a certain extent, but occasionally it's a bit too much. And there's a few things sort of gameplay-wise that feel like they need to be tightened up a little bit. The number one complaint I've got is fucking ropes in this game. Holy shit. For someone who's a Jedi, they should have a lot less of a hard time actually running or sliding and grabbing a freaking rope. It is ridiculously hard to get the timing down sometimes, to the point of frustration like you wouldn't believe.
Maybe it's a Sith rope.
No. It's not a Sith rope.
It's like red and glowing.
Prove it. I don't know.
No. It's it's a little frustrating. But so far the story's great. I think the main protagonist, Cal, is pretty good. I think he's a little bit bland to start with, but he certainly sort of develops as the story goes on, which is good. And there's a good explanation for his progression in terms of his Jedi sort of powers developing, because he basically starts off in a situation where he's been in hiding for ages and has kind of severed his connection to the Force, like forcefully, so that it's harder for him to be tempted to use his abilities. And that explains how he's sort of building up his connection again to the Force and learning new things as he goes on, as opposed to him being like a full-on Jedi that, why can't he just do all this cool shit to begin with?
This is set after Revenge of the Sith, right? But before New Hope?
It's somewhere before Rogue One. It'll be
Rogue One.
It'll be before Rogue One.
Yeah.
So in the gap between Revenge of the Sith and Rogue One.
Rogue One. Yeah.
So probably somewhere around Solo era, I would say. Probably pretty close to that. I don't know. Timeline gets a bit screwy around that point, but yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, overall, I'm loving the shit out of it. The supporting characters are fucking ace. They're really, really good. Particularly the droid that you have, whose name I think is, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, is it BD1?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. The little droid is one of the... No, that's the Sith version. No, the little droid is one of the best Star Wars droids, like, hands down. He's fucking great. So, yeah. Matt, what do you reckon?
Does he talk?
No, he just does the whole...
No, he beeps.
He boopity boops. Yeah.
He's a
beep
beepy
boops.
boop.
Yeah, so I found my gateway into Sekiro.
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
It is so fucking good. Holy crap. Okay, so this is why Souls games needed a difficulty setting. That's the argument I'm going to make right here, because the fact... So I started out like on Jedi Master, which is the second highest difficulty, and I'm very determined to stick to that difficulty now. But it was going to be it's very, very easy for me to actually like go and say, hey, look, I'm going to drop that back. But all it changes about the combat is timings. Like, that's the only thing it's really changed. Oh, and enemy health. Like, enemies are...
Should also mention as well, just to tie into what you're saying about the sort of Sekiro and Souls link, one thing I forgot to mention is it does have a bonfire-like system where there's these meditation points. It functions very similar to how it does in Sekiro, where, like, enemies respawn when you use them and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you die, then you lose your current XP up to your current skill point that you earned, and you have to go back and you have to at least hit that enemy to be able to get your XP back.
Very Souls-like.
Yeah, very, very Souls-like. So, like, the very first mini-boss in the game is one that apparently a lot of people struggled with. I struggled with it.
I didn't find him that hard. Like, but I think I managed to glitch around a corner and just get it without getting attacked, but yeah.
Did you... Are you talking about...
The giant frog thing?
There's multiple ones.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so there's versions of it that are like just Ogdos, I think, just Ogdos. But then there's a mini boss called Ogdo Bogdo, which is like the badass version of the Ogdos.
I just came in and heard the word Ogdo Bogdo.
That's what it's called. It's a
Did I have a stroke? Did I damage the speech center of my brain?
But yeah, I got into a fight with Ogdo Bogdo. I got my ass kicked, like literally one hit. Just
that Ogdo Bogdo.
Freaking Ogdo Bogdo, man. Final boss of Jedi. Like, that's the final boss of the game. I have beat it.
Yeah.
Like, I've beat that boss. Game's over.
It's the Uber Ogdo Bogdo.
But yeah, like, that boss, I got my ass kicked by it, and I'm like, no. Fuck that. And so I ended up sitting there for an hour and a half learning fucking timings so that I could fight that boss.
Beautiful. Yay,
and once I got through it, like the moment that I started getting to just standard ones, they were just easy as piss. And now it's like, okay, I can start to see the appeal of those more challenging timing based games. So yeah, this is totally a fucking gateway drug. It's great. I'm so looking forward to playing more. I wanted to finish Disco Elysium, but I've put in a couple of hours with Jedi Fallen Order, and I'm so looking forward to getting back into it.
It's a game that keeps getting better as you go too. It definitely picks up as you continue. Yeah.
If I finish it, then maybe Sekiro will be on my agenda before the end of the year. So,
how much is it?
How much is it?
Yeah.
I need to check. I think it's a full price game. I think it was like $89.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably for 70 at JB or something.
Yeah, I got it at 70. Yeah.
But it's
69.
also going to be Game of the Year contender on a lot of lists.
Yeah, I think so. I think it deserves it. I don't think it'll win a lot of those lists, but I think it'll be in the conversation because of how good it is. Polished aside, it's a fucking great game. It's really good.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
All right, I'm keen.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to get it, but it'll be probably next year sometime.
It's made me realize that like Respawn quietly this year has just been on a bit of a tear. Like they've had a pretty good year, all things considered. So
hell yeah.
And I don't
think the EA studio that wasn't made to work on Frostbite.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how that works, isn't it?
I was going to say, like, if anything, what I hope comes out of this is it convinces EA to fucking lay off of Frostbite. Like, let BioWare go back to Unreal for God's sake.
Yeah.
Like, let them go back.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the other thing that can be said about this game is that I think that when it was announced, like, almost a year, I want to say a year ago at last year's Game Awards, or was it the year before? It might have been 2 years. Because I remember when it was first announced at the Game Awards, it was... No, sorry, actually, it wasn't.
It was announced at E3.
That's right. It was the EA Play. Yeah, because Andrea Renee was hosting that year, and she had a conversation with Vince Zampella was sitting in the audience, and he didn't make sort of like a stage presentation or anything like that. She was sort of asking him, you're working on a new Star Wars game, because this was hot off all the controversy with, Battlefront 2. The Battlefront 2 and Amy Hennig's project getting shut down and all that kind of stuff. So I think they wanted to sort of get ahead of some good news with the Star Wars franchise and the fact that EA were actually doing some other stuff with it. There was such a non-event with the way that game was first spoken about and sort of announced that, like, at that moment, I thought this is going to be another disaster. Like, this is... Yeah.
He was just like, we're working on a game. It's called Jedi Fallen Order.
Yeah. It's going to be kind of cool. He really didn't sound like he was that invested in it. So
it was not that long ago that I had said that my expectations were really low for it. So I think that's just made me enjoy it way more now that I'm playing it.
It's the best kind of release. It's the ones you don't expect to be good that are actually awesome. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, definitely can recommend. It was very, very cool.
Speaking of, Christian...
Speaking of things that you don't expect to be good but are actually good.
Yeah.
Christian?
No, I never expected Christian to be good.
I think you're referring to Death Stranding.
I did. I'm making a joke.
Yeah, let's get into some Death Stranding talk. We've kind of held off talking about this because of some of our recent show schedule, and I've been chomping at the bit to get into some discussion around this game because I've been very curious as to where we're going to land on it. Because I'll be honest, I went into this game expecting to not like it. So, Christian, on the scale of sort of cold to hot, where would you pitch yourself currently on Death Stranding? Hot being you really love it?
Currently?
Yeah.
Hot.
Hot? You're pretty hot on it?
Very, very, very hot.
Yeah.
Very hot.
Would you say steamy?
Yeah. I'd say near boiling.
Really?
Wow.
Okay. I would put myself at extremely fucking warm. But definitely in the positive end.
Maybe I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
I'd say
maybe pick a better way to describe that.
Let's say I'm just
maybe
moist.
That's what you do.
I want to know how many strands out of a
how tepid is your body humor when discussing,
genuinely curious. How many hours are you both in?
I'm nowhere near as many as Christian, I can tell you that. Yeah.
Are you sure? Because I stopped playing for Pokemon. I think I'm about 30 hours in.
Yeah, not even fucking close.
Okay.
I'm at about half that. So, yeah, about 15, I think.
Right. So there was a thing that I was seeing going around on Twitter that at 10 hours in, Death Stranding is but at 25 hours in, Death Stranding becomes Game of the Year material.
Okay.
So that also lines up with how you're feeling about it, which is really interesting to me.
That makes sense, but I think that first 10 hours, how amped you are is how down you are for the crazy Kojima stuff from the start. Like, if you're someone who's kind of so on his weird antics and isn't kind of digging the craziness, then I can see you doing the air thing until 25 hours in. But I'm always down for his bizarre shit. So I loved it from the start.
I think there's one thing that will really guarantee you going into this game with the right expectations, and that is don't play this game expecting Metal Gear. It's as simple as that.
Oh, hell no.
Yeah. So
we got a comment in chat that I really like. That's like super moist on Death Stranding.
Yep. But no, we're going a little long, so I won't really give too many thoughts on it. I'll just say that I like it a lot, and I'm actually surprised how much I'm looking forward to going back to it off Pokemon. I thought that I would like Pokemon would be the game that I'm super into, and that Death Stranding would get relegated, but it's actually like flipped. So.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, I keep on having conversations with people at work about it, and every time I have a conversation with anybody about this game, I want to go and play it immediately. It's just one of those things. The story is exactly what you expect in terms of it being just fucking bizarre. The gameplay mechanics, though, in terms of all of the different layers of stuff you can do as you're sort of traveling around and delivering and all that kind of stuff. I think that the beat-by-beat kind of gameplay and how it's constructed and sort of crafted is tight as fuck. It's really good. So I'm very jazzed about that. And there's a lot of stuff different and unique about this game that makes it unlike anything I've ever played before. In a good way. I think it's a really fucking like ambitious game, And I think he's really taken a punt, not in terms of the crazy story stuff, it's in terms of the actual sort of, what you spend the vast majority of your time in this game doing. And for a lot of people, and myself included, and obviously Christian, I think that what he's done in that respect has paid off. I think it's good. Yeah.
I find the moment-to-moment gameplay really actually relaxing. Like, I find it really enjoyable. Like, everyone knows by now it's basically Amazon delivery service, the game, for a part of it anyway. But it just like looking through the list of orders and deciding like how much stuff to load up and arranging it on my back, and then like setting out, like drawing a route on my map where I'm going to go, getting my ladders. I find that stuff just really fun and like relaxing, and then just trudging along. And
you're in the wrong career, Christian.
I know. It's super. It's like Zen for me.
Yeah.
Honestly, like the delivery mechanic sounds fucking awesome.
Yeah,
it is.
Because like I'm so down with that.
One thing that it's not, like I've heard people say it's like fetch quest the game, but it's not, because you're not getting anything. You're just delivering stuff. You don't have to go out and get 5 strands or whatever. Like you just get the stuff from a computer and deliver it. Yeah,
yeah. But you do get to S rank delivery of your mother's corpse, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not real life.
Yeah,
a lot. Like, let's not go on about like the themes and everything of the game, but like the amount of like numbers and reward screens and everything that it throws up at you every time you finish your mission. It's like bar after like S rank, this many stars, this many likes, blah 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 blah, and that's all very intentional. I feel, because like part of the theme of the game is like people's responses to social media and how people love getting likes.
There's definitely a social commentary with a bit of an inside humor aspect to it, I think. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
So Christian, on a scale of jellified bone marrow to cascading waterfall, where do you fall on your opinion of Death Stranding?
I'd call it a laminar flow of gazpacho.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Very soupy. I like it.
High praise.
Yeah. I think.
Interesting. I'm not going to use that scale. Next thing you know, I'll be rating things in terms of volume of uterine fluid, and I just don't want to do that. So, it's good. It's real good. And Matt, I think in particular, this is exactly your kind of game.
I'm really looking forward to playing it. It's probably gonna be the next one I pick up.
2 games I've got to play now. Jesus, guys.
I know.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I started off this month expecting that Jedi Fallen Order was going to be like a bit of a non-event because it had been a rush project and it wasn't looking that exciting. And Death Stranding, I thought was just going to be hot trash given how weird it was looking. Turns out they're both really fucking good games.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's weird.
Chaining my 1,300th Pokemon is sounding less appealing now.
Have fun talking about that for the next few weeks, Adrian.
Oh, man. No, it's good. And I will say as well, the other 2 things that stand out when it comes to Death Stranding, the visuals are gorgeous. Like, graphically, the game is super impressive. And
it's peak.
It's right up there. It's a good sort of showcase of what, a high-end PC can do for sure, but also I think what the PlayStation is capable of is definitely
Decima engine.
Oh yeah, hell yeah, because this is the same engine that Horizon Zero Dawn was made on as well. Christian, I am going to take a punt here and guess that you are a big fan of the soundtrack as well.
I love the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
fucking
I listen
great.
to it all the time. Yeah. Silent Poets and Low Roar and all about it. Churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every time I'm sort of just gunning around in this game, like whether I'm on foot or whether I'm on a vehicle, and just sort of listening to these really carefully curated and selected tracks, that it feels like the whole experience is being handcrafted in a really awesome way. So
some of the best moments are like where you're sort of getting towards the end of a chapter, doing a delivery, and you'll come out on like a big expanse of landscape, and you're like slowly walking down a hill, and then like a new song will start playing. And it comes up with like the artist and the song name, and then you're just slowly walking down this hill with this beautiful scenery, and it just takes its time and just has this moment to just play this song, and it's just these beautiful moments. Love it.
Yeah,
that sounds so good.
It's awesome. Yeah. All right, well, anyway, that's tons of recent game talk. So let's jump into some industry news, because there has been a bunch of stuff going on this week as well. So where shall we start tonight? Do you want to kick off with the big Valve thing, Christian?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, I'll just quickly mention that. So Valve have teased that they are announcing Half-Life Alex, which is a new Half-Life game for VR, the HTC Vive, I guess.
Or its real name.
No, this is not Half-Life 3. No,
it's not Half-Life 3, and it's not Alex's colon. But it's an actual new Half-Life game. Like this is the first. It is. I mean, we haven't seen.
It's a Half-Life titled game. That's like saying that the Portal VR experiences we got were new Portal games.
I think it's going to be more than that. I
think that the game is going to be about tinkering with robots because that's what Alex did.
Yeah,
more of a VR experience as opposed to an actual shooter. See, I disagree.
It's gonna be a game.
If it's a shooter, then great. I will be pleasantly surprised. But
I'm still banking on colonic irrigation. From
okay. Look. I'm just saying. How many times in recent memory has Valve impressed us
with their software,
with their games?
I've been impressed with everything they've done.
Artifact was awesome.
Oh, yeah, okay, fine. All right. Artifact sucked. everything else, though, what else?
The VR games and stuff they've done were fine.
Valve was Left 4 Dead, wasn't it? Or am
that's not. I'm talking
Turtle Rock Studios.
Was it? Which was just the zombie one that Valve did. Was I'm sure it was one of those. Anyway, yeah, I'm probably way off. Yeah.
I just think that it's dangerous to get hyped about it before we know anything beyond a name.
Oh, yeah. I'm hopeful that it is going to be more than an experience, particularly because there's a VR studio that Valve bought out. They're in the middle of making a game, and the game that they were making was a full first-person shooter, and it was like the most impressive FPS VR game that I'd seen to date, and it had gravity powers in it, so you could gravity objects towards you, gravity guns towards you, that sort of stuff. And the fact that studio got bought out, that game got absorbed into Valve. I'm hopeful that they've morphed that into Half-Life Alyx.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a sequel or anything. I think you can rule that out.
Oh no, I don't think it's going to be a sequel, but I think it's going to be more substantial than an experience.
Hopefully, I hope so.
When it comes to gravity stuff, I'm generally down with it, but I just can't see the attraction. But anyway, so I think in terms of the Half-Life franchise, this is naturally the only way they could go, because the consumer expectations for what would actually be a Half-Life 3, I think, are impossible to meet. There's just no chance that they're going to be able to craft something that will sort of match what people have got in their head as what the thing must be for Half-Life 3 to be as big as it needs to be. Because 1 and 2 were genre defining in ways that sort of push things forward in a way that you can't really do now after we've had 15 more years of
hasn't
shooters.
It crested that hill though? Isn't it at the point now where people don't expect anything? Because
that's exactly right.
So far on.
I don't know. I don't think enough time's passed. I really don't. So.
I think it has. I don't think people are still expecting Half-Life 3 to even exist, let alone be anything worth playing. If they announce Half-Life 3 as a real release, people would not be going, it's going to be amazing. They'd be like, I bet it's going to be shit. That would be the expectation.
Let's be honest. Valve has not been stopped from making shit games just because people expect their games to be good. So
it's true.
I think there's a point. I think you could have it's going to be good. It's going to be good. It's going to be Half-Life 3, but it's because it's been memed, because it's memeified, and it's in the zeitgeist. It's now on the other side of that hill. I think. Where
I think
it's reached peak saturation, and now it's not going to be.
Yeah,
it's not
nobody cares
anymore. It's not a game anymore. It's a meme. So when it comes out, you can't expect it to be a good game because it's not even. People don't even think of it as a game anymore.
Yeah, I think that the issue isn't the consumers and their expectations. I think it's the team and their expectations. They're going to want to make something really fucking awesome, but I don't think the people in there have the confidence to do that because they're not a game development studio really anymore. So
and the lead writer, was it Mike Laidlaw? I think his name was.
Yeah,
he left Valve and he basically just dumped Half-Life 3 story on the internet. Just said this is what was going to happen, and now it's never going to happen.
I didn't know that was out. I'm going to read that.
If you want to read what Half-Life 3 was going to be, you can just read it online.
Because it was a big cliffhanger that they left it on, wasn't it? From the end of 2. Yeah.
But,
And where did I was just going to ask, where did Black Mesa sort of fit into that whole thing? But I just don't understand anything about this.
Black Mesa was a mod project, and Valve adopted it.
Right,
basically.
Fair enough. Cool. All right. Well, I mean, awesome for Half-Life fans. Maybe it's still going to be an expensive step-on point if it's only Valve's hardware that you can play it on and their ecosystem. So, yeah. I mean, if all of the people out there on PlayStation VR or Oculus and that kind of stuff can't get it because they don't have a Vive system, that would be a bit shit. But I
think that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be full room scale, Vive only, and it's going to be buy-in or child.
Crazy. So about $2,000+ to play the new Half-Life game. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah. So the other thing that happened today, this morning actually, is we had the announcement of the nominees for the 2019 Game Awards. So this is the Jeff Keighley hosted production that has been happening every year. I think we're up to year 5 or year 6 now. For quite some time. I'll be unabashedly honest. I love the shit out of the Game Awards. I think it's a really fun show each year, and I enjoy watching the hell out of it. I think it's really, really cool. And I think that the general involvement from the games media at large has made this thing quite good over the years that they've been involved. It's not like a small team that are kind of, putting an extremely subjective take on what the best stuff during the year is. Like, I think this is widely enough sort of spread now that most of the big media outlets throughout the world have kind of gotten involved and made this thing pretty much the biggest of its kind throughout the world each year. It's become quite the thing. So, and every year, of course, we've talked about our sort of predictions and what we think is going to win and that kind of stuff. Now, we will do that properly at an episode of Party Loaded in the future because we're going to gamify the whole thing and do it proper. But just for now, I thought it might be cool to sort of go through and just chat briefly about the nominations or the nominees for Game of the Year, of which is, pretty much the prime category. So Game of the Year, there's, I believe, 6 nominations this year. So we got Control, which is up in the discussion. The Remedy game earlier this year. We got Death Stranding, of course, which, given that there's quite a bit of hype for that game at the moment, could be. Super Smash Ultimate is in the list as well. We also have Resident Evil 2 Remake, which, earlier in the year, but people haven't forgotten about it. We've got Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, which I'm sure Christian and Adrian will agree with. And we've got the Outer Worlds as well. Not Outer Wilds, Outer Worlds. So those are the ones that have been added this year for consideration.
Sekiro. It'll be Sekiro. Sekiro's going to win. That's it.
You reckon Sekiro's going to win? Okay.
Yep, it'll be Nier Automata.
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
That's win every
Yeah.
year.
It'll be Untitled Goose Game. The goose will come out and steal the award.
Is there anything there you think doesn't belong?
Smash Ultimate.
And Resident Evil 2, I think.
No, what? No, fuck off. Resident Evil 2 absolutely.
It's a remake. It's a remake. Don't give an award to a game that's already been made.
It's not a conventional remake, though. It's basically a new game.
No.
Okay, interesting.
I think Resident Evil 2 fully deserves to be there. If it wasn't for Sekiro, it would absolutely be my game of the year.
Okay. But what about Smash? Do we feel that Smash belongs in that group? Is there anything that you would have replaced it with in terms of what should be there?
Yeah, an actual game.
Wow.
Wow.
As far as replacing it, I don't know about that.
So I've played Control. Control's very good. Is it Game of the Year worthy good? I think that it's really good, but I don't know if it is Game of the Year worthy. And the reason I say that, I have pointed this out before, the Game of the Year award list is severely lacking in a lot of really good indie titles that came out this year. Like, I make a joke about the Goose Game thing. Goose Game shouldn't win Game of the Year.
No.
But it's still a good game, right? But having played Disco Elysium now, I can say with 100% certainty that the Outer Worlds shouldn't be there and Disco Elysium should be.
Okay.
And I would say the same thing for Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds should be in there. But I find it...
That sounds like it's more about your taste, I think, than the broader industry.
I don't know about that because critically Outer Wilds is very well received.
Outer Wilds, yes. And I think the difference here, and this is the important point, it's to do with the panel of sort of 80 or so sort of media personalities that are involved in putting this list together. What it relies on is when an indie game makes the list for Game of the Year, for instance, it relies on enough of those people actually being familiar with it to actually put it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big problem.
Yeah.
Like, Like a lot of those indie, like okay, look, put it this way: Disco Elysium. All the people that I know that have played it and really fucking love it are game devs. Like it hasn't reached the public consciousness in the way that a lot of other games have. Yeah. Same goes for Outer Wilds. Like you can say that's my opinion, Christian, but have you played it?
No, but I guess maybe I meant more like your sphere, like your the types of games you play.
Well,
people you know.
That's why I'm saying like I can't comment on Smash because I've not played Smash, right? Yeah. I've played Control. I think that Control is probably the better contender for being there. Outer Worlds, though, not so much. Outer Worlds is really good. It's a really good RPG. It absolutely deserves RPG of the Year, but it is not better than Disco Elysium.
Sure.
It is not better.
I've heard a ton of chatter this year with people who've played both that Wilds over Worlds, like by a mile.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think enough people have played Wilds to put that forward in favor of Worlds. Yeah.
And that's what it really comes down to. I find it weird and a little bit cringy that the indie games section is sponsored by Subway. Like it's the only section
it's like the fresh indie game of the year.
The
pun works on a small level.
Well, it's also kind of funny that the indie game section is sponsored. But yeah, at the end of the day, like the game of the years, the games that are there, I can't comment on all of them. But the two games that I have played that I can comment on, I'm like, like maybe. Put it this way: the two games that are on there are definitely in my top games for the year, but I haven't played the other ones, and they could very easily be pushed out because they're not very high in my top games.
Totally. So, I just think in general it's going to be very hard to pick the winner, whereas in past years it's been quite a bit easier to narrow it down to maybe a couple of key contenders.
No, Luke, you're outnumbered here. 75% of us say Sekiro.
See, that's the thing, though. I actually am playing... We'll get to this when we do our predictions, but I'll tell you right now, I won't be predicting Sekiro, and that's not because of the quality of the game. That's because of the widespread nature of the media base's involvement with that game or not. Like, I don't think enough people have actually played it in that group of 80 or so. So, yeah.
There's no way Sekiro will win.
No way. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, so, Adrian, throw it to you for some cool pow news. What's going on?
Yeah. So, as listeners are aware, Christian and I have been getting into Street Fighter. And every Street Fighter is interesting because I didn't know this when I first started playing it, but when it first came out, it only launched with a limited number of characters, and then they brought out extra characters as time went on. As
sort of season passes.
Yeah, that's right. There's a season pass. But the most recent sort of expansion, if you could call it that, version, I suppose, has come out, has been announced as Street Fighter V Champion Edition. So the main key features of Champion Edition are there's one brand new character who's called Gil. Gil was the boss in Street Fighter 3, I believe, or was it 4? 3?
3, yeah.
And he's a dude who's like half blue and half red, split down the middle with like a flowing golden Fabio hairstyle, and he has like fire and ice powers.
He looks like a cultured Blanca a little bit to me.
He's if anyone's watched My Hero Academia, he's Todoroki, but he's an Adonis version of Todoroki.
He is. Yeah, he's very like chiseled marble, and I think that's his character. He's meant to be some sort of like holier than thou, godlike being. Whatever.
I know all of these references.
Yeah, I don't even know who Gil is. So, all I know that's really weird is that there's a character in the game called Urien who has a costume, a skin that is Gil.
Because he's Urien's Gil's brother.
Oh, I didn't know that. There you go. It's his brother. So he had a costume of his brother. Now his brother's in the game. So now, you could have two characters that both look like Gil fighting each other and they're different characters, or you could be fighting one you don't know who it is. I think that's really weird.
It's strange.
It's no weirder than the Ryu Ken sort of palette swaps that we've had to deal with in the past.
No, because that's like a totally different character. No, you're right.
But that's
different now.
They've got the same, or traditionally they had the same moveset but look different. This is the reverse. This is different movesets but look the same.
But in earlier versions of Street Fighter, weren't they so similar in terms of the visuals that you couldn't really tell them apart? Like, I know that Ken evolved over time.
No, they look totally different.
Okay.
They're different colors.
They had the same moveset but they look different.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, the real kicker with this announcement is that this championship edition includes, if you buy the championship edition, which is only $30, includes Yes, includes every single character that's ever been released and every single costume that's ever been released apart from some of the special event costumes.
It's over 200.
Yeah, over 200 costumes. Costumes to buy, because I've done it on the PlayStation store, are usually around $6. So there's over 200 costumes in the game. This new version costs, let's say, 50 Australian dollars. For anyone that's already sunk hundreds of dollars into the game buying costumes, they've now brought out a version of the game that has everything in it for
it's super brutal.
Bucks.
Like
it's so hard.
Even if you spent $100 on the game, to have an edition come out that has everything you've spent plus everything else, like it would suck big time.
Do you think that Capcom will turn around and actually give those players something? Because that seems real bad.
No, because what they've given them instead is you can buy the version for $5 cheaper than the retail version,
which is the upgrade version.
It's the upgrade version.
If you already have it, but it's only $5 cheaper. So
you can upgrade your version of the game to be the equivalent of the Champion Edition for $5 cheaper than it is to buy the entire new game. So that's a bit of a kick in the balls.
It's good for us.
It's good for us because we've only just gotten into it. But yeah, for anyone that's sort of dropped a lot of money, and like you can buy those costumes in packs, so you can get usually a whole character set of costumes, about 5, 6, 7 costumes for about $13. But there's 40 characters, and so that's a lot of fucking money if you've spent it all. If you've spent that money on getting costumes and stuff in the game. And stages, you buy stages for individual amounts of dosh as well, which are also included in this version of the game. There's also a few extra gameplay additions, like there's some new skills and abilities that they're giving each character. So for those who are interested, they're getting each character's getting a new V skill. So that's new as well. So exciting news for those interested. But if you're not into fighting games, it's like, who gives a shit?
I'll just quickly add I want to add one more thing, which is when Capcom released Street Fighter V, the promise of Street Fighter V is that it would always remain one game environment, so that if you bought Street Fighter V on release, you would be supported all the way through. Because what they did with 4 was they released Street Fighter 4, then Arcade Edition, then Ultimate Edition, and they were all separated from each other, and that really annoyed people because if you were forced to rebuy the whole new game in order to keep playing. So they promised it would be this continuous environment, which they have kept the promise. But what they didn't say was that if you're a sucker, if you spend your money early, because we're just going to release everything at the end for like cheaper than more normal games. So,
ruh-roh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty shit move.
Well, I mean, on one hand, those people aren't losing anything, but I totally understand the frustration.
They did get the game's been out for 3 years, so they've had multiple years to enjoy the content that they have purchased already that other people haven't been playing. So.
It's a bit to me like Kickstarter exclusives, like when you back something and you get a Kickstarter exclusive, which is like a main piece of content that you would actually probably want to have in the full version of the game. Like Armello is a good example that springs to mind. Like there was an entire faction in Armello that was a Kickstarter exclusive that they then added to the game later on because it was a significant part of that game, and to not have it was kind of shit. But then all the people who backed the game and got that as an exclusive early on were kind of gypped as a result of that being added later. And
I just thought of an analogy that's like makes me convinced that it is shit for old players, and that's if this was Hearthstone and they released a new Hearthstone bundle that had every single card in it for like $30, I'd be pretty raw about spending over $1,000 on Hearthstone.
Oh yes, okay, that's a good call. I would be very angry. Yeah. All right,
that's what it is. You can trust me to bring the anger, bring bring the bile.
Take those two groups of players and split them in two. So anyway, there's our segue into our main topic tonight. Christian, I'm going to throw to you now because you know exactly where this is heading.
Gloops.
No.
So tonight's topic is gloops. No, tonight's topic is divisive games. So with Death Stranding in the news, and also Pokémon Sword and Shield, I'd say. There's been a couple of high-profile games that have, like, there's been quite a split conversation about them, and there's been, what's going on? Back and forths on online and articles and Twitter and people saying, if you don't like Pokemon, then you're a gatekeeping man baby, and people saying if you like Pokemon, then you're a casual that doesn't appreciate the series, and blah 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 blah, and it's created some division. So we're going to talk about what might cause games to be divisive, what it actually even means to be divisive, and the kind of notable examples of divisive games. So I wanted to just start us off with a quick little definition that I jotted down for what I think a divisive game actually is, and then you guys let me know what I've missed and what you disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
So I've simply said, being divisive means there is a major difference of opinion between two sizable chunks of an audience. The causes of the division are often contentious, leading to discussions, articles, and unfortunately insults from both sides. So that's basically it. The key is that it's like a conversation happens, and that there's two sizable groups of the audience, and there's a dialogue about the game being divisive. What have I missed?
If we disagree on your definition, then it is a divisive definition itself, right?
I'd say no, because you're just one person. Like if there was a whole
fuck you, Matt. What do you know?
Like,
you piece of shit.
Like, I'll say, like,
piece of shit. You're a definition casual.
Oh no.
There are always going to be people who like and dislike every single game. You're never going to satisfy everybody, and you're maybe never going to make everyone angry, or maybe your game's really, really bad. But so that's why I think it has to be like proportionate. Like, there are people who didn't like Mario 64 probably, but that doesn't make the game a divisive game. Just because some people,
you got to draw a line. Yeah, for reference, I totally agree with your definition of being a shit.
Yeah, I tend to agree with it as well. I think that it needs to be measurable in some way, though. And I think probably one of the easier measures when it comes to divisive opinion on the overall reception or the overall quality of a game is often when there are sort of published sort of reviews with very sort of polarizing opinions on it, or we do have the benefit these days of seeing like reviewer aggregated scores and comments for games versus consumer sort of versions of the same thing. And I'll often sort of see a game which has like a vastly different sort of reviewer score from people who are sort of, occupying professional sort of media roles in the industry versus what the general public think. And when there's a huge gap between those two things, I'd consider that to be quite divisive as well. Because it's weird when people who actually write, the articles sort of breaking down the individual aspects of a game and kind of putting like almost like a professional lens on it, have a vastly different sort of view of something than the general public. I think that's fascinating as well, and that generates quite a lot of conversation too. So, yeah.
I think that points to like the division that makes a game divisive can appear in different places, right? So it can be a division between game critics. So you might have games that are getting scored like 5s or getting scored 9s by critics. Or you can have a situation like you were saying, Luke, where critics are giving the games quite good scores, but then users are panning the scores. And the division can be appearing in different places.
Yeah. It sometimes can be resulting from a particular design decision as well, which is almost designed to divide the audience. And I think it's one of those things where often artists who, like to take risks will go for something that they know is highly contentious because it'll actually get them attention. So they want their game to not be sort of forgettable. And sometimes they'll do something that they know is going to stir the pot and really piss a lot of people off. But for that reason, it's actually going to get them a lot of attention and potentially sales of their product as well. So,
can you give an example of that specifically?
I can definitely think of examples in terms of books and movies. I mean, I think George R.R. Martin's a great example of that. Game of Thrones is hugely contentious because he will do things deliberately designed to shock the audience and be contentious in that regard. And it's because he wants to keep people on their toes and make them not get bored, essentially. And I think the same kind of thing.
People generally agree that that's a good thing.
Yeah, though. I don't know if that creates a division, though. I think that's surprising, but.
I think it has in certain points. I really do. I think it's hard now with Game of Thrones in particular because it's sort of become such a mainstream thing. But back in maybe 10 years ago, this was much more of a thing you could point to and sort of say George R.R. Martin's a divisive author, whereas now his works have kind of been taken and adapted and morphed into new forms. So it's tough. So yeah,
I would say game wise, and this is where I'm going to suggest that we need to narrow down who we're talking about when it's divisive,
right? It's Kojima for a start.
Kojima's divisive, but Kojima's divisive among gamers, right? Whereas what you're kind of talking about, GTA was made to, elicit shock from the general public because that got a free marketing. But amongst gamers, it was like, fucking hell, GTA's great, right? And that's where you had this divisiveness of like, hey, Fox News and your grandma are talking about how horrible GTA is, and then you're playing it. It's a really good game. Whereas I think that what we kind of need to limit our conversation to is when gamers are divided on the value of a game.
Right? Let's give some examples, because I think anyone listening is probably like, all right, tell us what are some divisive games.
Okay, well, let's do that. I just wanted to say to your point, Matt, I totally agree we should keep it within the realm of gamers. And I think that there's a distinction there between divisive games and controversial games.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think controversial games, that's what kind of leaks out into the mainstream and people get kind of alarmist about. But that's slightly different to divisive games. So who wants to name some examples of divisive games? Luke, you start with one.
All right. I think this is one that we spoke about in the last week, and I think it's an easy one to go to because it's something we've discussed recently too. Mass Effect 3. I think Mass Effect 3 is a really good example of a divisive game, and I think that there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think that a lot of the reasoning for that particular game comes down to the ending, which we kind of know was very divisive at the time because people sort of came at it from a couple of different angles. I mean, on one hand, you've got the angle that Matt sort of came at when we discussed the game on our 200th episode, because it's one of your sort of top 10s, in terms of Mass Effect 3 as a game being fucking phenomenal and amazingly polished and like a really excellent story and all that kind of stuff. But then you've actually got this huge fervent fan base that have come at it from the perspective of it is number 3 in a series that I'm massively invested in, and it hasn't presented me the payoff that I was expecting as a result of the hours sunk into that. So I think that's an example of where it can sort of divide that audience, because you've got two different sets of expectations. You've got one set which is self-contained within the game itself, and then you've got another set which is looking at it from a trilogy perspective, and that really kind of cut the audience right down the center when it came to meeting their expectations. So
yeah. Absolutely. I think Mass Effect 3 is actually a really interesting one, because the people that were not fans of that ending, like, put it this way, right? Like, it's one of my favorite games, but I'm also not a fan of its ending. It's just that it didn't ruin the game for me in the way that I think that it ruined it for a lot of other people. And I think that's where the divisiveness kind of comes from. It's like that specific thing, like, this ending was so bad, it ruined this game for me. Whereas for me, it was like, this ending was freaking awful, but I can overlook that for all the touching character moments I got to have along the way. And it became divisive for that reason.
I think that like Mass Effect 3 and quite a lot of divisive games, they're almost divisive because their detractors like them to a point, or they like things about them, but then there are things they wish were different, or things they wish were the same as old games. So it's quite often existing fans of a franchise that create divisiveness, I think, and for better or worse. So I think that like, Mass Effect 3 definitely a divisive game, and it's whether or not that ending was enough to spoil the whole experience for you, which it was for some people, wasn't for other people, and that's where the divisiveness comes in, I think.
Pokemon's a good example of exactly that too, and we've seen that a lot recently. So
so because you get the critics, a lot of I've read some of the reviews, and the reviewers of the Pokemon games, they like the curry decks, they like the shopping for clothes, and they like the wild area. So like the stuff that they're valuing is appealing to them, but to another subset of gamers, of Pokemon fans, that stuff isn't what they play the games for. And so there's a division in what are you enjoying about Pokemon games? And if you're enjoying this, then you like the game. If you're enjoying that, then you're not liking the game, and that creates that division.
Like the critics are fans, and the people that are enjoying it and giving it really good reviews are also fans. And that's what's kind of really uncomfortable about seeing the discourse. I love that word because it makes you kind of cringe. The discourse about it online is so bad because of the fact that like you have these critics that are calling fans non-fans because they didn't value the things that they valued about the game, and then vice versa as well, right? Like, I don't give a shit about having every single Pokemon captured. I don't understand why you would. But then the person that does give a shit about that is obviously offended, and it's like,
well, you don't care about
everything sucks.
Pokemon? Jeez. What crazy lunatic would give a shit about that?
In a lot of ways, I don't think either side on that discussion as wrong. Like, I've commented on Pokemon in, previous, and certainly having seen the release of it, it's like I can understand some of the criticisms, but certainly for me, like I probably fall somewhere in the middle of that.
I think really divisive games, something that I've noticed as well is that divisiveness around that game actually stands the test of time in its own right as well. Like that conversation and that debate about that game sort of lingers on long after its release. It's not something that sort of everybody looks back on like with a rose-tinted fondness and nostalgia for and forgets about all the controversy unless it changes form massively, between release and later. But
there are some exceptions to that, I think, but that's definitely, I think, the general rule. But like an exception I'd point to is Wind Waker. So when Wind Waker first released, it was quite divisive because of the art style, because of going for the cell shaded thing, where there was a large section of the fan base that wanted Zelda to go more mature and go more like darker, and Wind Waker was very divisive because of that. Now that we had Twilight Princess and we had even like Skyward Sword and other things, and tastes have changed, and there's an appreciation for kind of more creative art styles, people now look back on Wind Waker and love the art style. Like a lot of people do. And I think some people have forgotten how divisive it was when it first came out.
It was judged relative to the content at its time. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Diablo 3 is another good example of that too, because not for the same reason, but when Diablo 3 first launched, that was highly controversial because there was a lot of changes to the Diablo formula, and we still see conversations around a little bit of that now, like particularly the bright color palette that sort of it moved to, and less of that sort of dark grittiness in Diablo 3. It's a lot more of a sort of comic book sort of incarnation of Diablo in a lot of ways, and it had its own controversy around some of the decisions in the game's launch, like around the real money auction house and that kind of stuff. But this is one of those cases where the game has evolved considerably since release, and the product that Diablo 3 is now compared to launch, nowhere near as divisive. I think people are universally pretty positive on it. So it's just launched Diablo.
I just realized something that divisive games generate, and that is images on Twitter with red circles over things that people dislike.
Yeah.
That is always something that happens. Like, I remember when Diablo 3 first got released and there was the freaking rainbow in one of the early areas, and people were like, look at this shit! What the fuck is this? Why is there a rainbow in my Diablo game? And other people were like, oh wow, Diablo has color now, that's great. Yeah. And like that divisiveness was like, was look at that fucking conversation. Yeah. And now like the Pokemon thing is also just that. Like, I've seen screenshots floating around where it's like, look, you can see the pixels. And it's like, okay, yeah, divisive games quite often spawn that shit, especially if it's aesthetically divisive.
It's that two different audience thing though as well, like particularly with Diablo 3, because people who are new to the franchise probably wouldn't give a shit about the color. They'd think that that's actually cool, looks great, where it's the crusty old Diablo fans that are probably the ones more impacted by that. So
and I do think like with this Pokemon, that it's the conversation kind of feeds on itself and has like a vicious cycle where the people start pointing out more of the flaws and more of the stuff they hate about the game because they want to kind of elevate that voice and try and give legitimacy to their criticisms. And that's why I think that it being a conversation is key to being divisive, because if people just played Pokemon and didn't like it and other people played it and liked it, then maybe those opinions would still exist. But if the conversation wasn't happening, then it wouldn't be sort of elevated to this kind of toxic level.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be toxic though. It can just be a really.
It doesn't have to be toxic. No way.
Yeah.
I'll say another example I think is divisive, and that's Metal Gear Solid 4 actually, because but that's something that I don't think really got toxic because the divisiveness was still within Metal Gear fans. So Metal Gear Solid 4, many Metal Gear fans didn't like it because it was the actual gameplay was quite limited. There were so many super long cutscenes. There was so many twists and turns and so many retcons of previous lore from the games. The game had 4 false endings, and there were a lot of Metal Gear fans who just felt like it missed the mark, especially because Metal Gear Solid 3 is a lot of people's favorites. But you had outlets like IGN gave it a 10 out of 10. But I think that did create a divide within Metal Gear fans, but it didn't spill outside of that, and the conversation wasn't really toxic. So
yeah,
I'd
agree.
Yeah.
one of the examples that I was chatting with Luke about very early on in the week in secret was Dragon Age 2. When Dragon Age 2 was announced, it was massively divisive because like the original game is this really kind of deep strategy game, whereas Dragon Age 2 turned into an action hack and slash type thing. You didn't get to choose your character. You were always Hawk. Like either male or female Hawk, choose your one, right? Versus the kind of role playing tabletop experience almost that the original game had, where Origins was kind of the selling point for it, being able to be like, okay, I'm going to be a dwarf and I'm going to have this background which changes the entirety of my starting area, which is a really cool mechanic.
And there was actually a world you traveled around in Origins as opposed to 2, which was just one city. Yeah,
exactly. And like so for me, I actually thoroughly enjoyed Dragon Age 2. I didn't enjoy it necessarily more than Dragon Age 1. I enjoyed them as separate games, despite the fact they're in the same franchise, because it was still a valuable game, right? But yeah, like you're shaking your head. You totally disagree with me.
I just hated it, so.
Yeah, but like narrative.
What a perfect example of divisive.
But it's interesting because maybe it was because before social media was such a big thing, but I felt like most people hated Dragon Age 2. I didn't see the conversation of people liking it. So maybe it was my bubble, but I wasn't aware that was divisive. I thought everyone hated that game.
One of the top games of all time that I mentioned, right? Like social media wasn't around then, but I certainly Deus Ex Invisible War, that was mostly bad press. But you go and look online now and nobody remembers the bad press. You go and read Wikipedia and everything like that, and it's like, yeah, the game scored about an 85. But critics and fans and everything, like it talks about how they panned it. The fact that it was not as good as the first for these reasons. And I think Dragon Age 2 does kind of fall into that. And you're right. Like there wasn't quite the discussion about it. And it probably did feel more like it was just hate. But I think in hindsight, like, again, you kind of go look at the reviews and fairly certain you'll find it's actually probably not that bad.
I think one of the most divisive games that I've maybe played is the original Wolfenstein, in that, like, Hitler was the bad guy in that game. And I just don't, like, I think most people would agree that, like, he's not a villain. So I don't really understand why that was the case. You were killing Nazis. I mean, I think there's a great division there in the community between whether you should have been even hurting those guys in the first place. Because I knew the bad guy in that scenario.
I think most people know right from wrong, so yeah.
You ruined it. You ruined my bit. I hope you're proud of yourself.
I'm super proud of myself.
We all know who the real Hitler is.
Oh, sorry, that was not a joke. Anyway,
that was so good. That didn't happen.
I'll throw another one out there, and we'll move on maybe afterwards. But I think Final Fantasy X is also a divisive game, because for a lot of people I've spoken to, the infamous laugh.
That's an engine. If you know Final Fantasy X,
for a lot of people I've spoken to, Final Fantasy X is actually their favorite game. But I think they tend to be players who maybe didn't play 7, 8, 9 as they came out, jumped on at 10. I actually jumped on at 10, quite liked it. But I've heard people say that it was the first Final Fantasy game that was kind of super linear. Like there's no open world that you explore in it, and it wasn't as deep as previous games and stuff like that. So I think that I've noticed Final Fantasy X is also a divisive game.
We've got to also mention Destiny.
Are you thinking linear? Are you thinking the one with lightning in it? That character?
No, that's 13. 10 is actually linear too.
I thought 13 was like really divisive at the time. I don't remember 10.
13, I think, is just universally disliked.
Bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now we're disagreeing on what games are divisive. Like, the rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper.
I don't disagree with what you just said, though, Matt. I think that's a pretty clear one. OG.
Oh, yeah. Destiny. OG Destiny. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed OG Destiny, and I totally respect every single person that was like, this game's garbage. Because the only reason I can say that I enjoyed OG Destiny was because of the fact that it had Halo gunplay, and it was super fucking fun. And I needed that scratch to the itch that Halo 4 wasn't giving me. So, Like, for that reason, I thoroughly enjoyed it and I played the shit out of it.
Yeah. It's funny, games that have actually gone on to have, like, really successful sequels, though, like, a lot of that divisiveness of the prior titles sort of gets forgotten in a way when the sequel overshadows it. Yeah. So...
I don't think anybody's forgotten Destiny.
No,
Especially not Destiny fans.
That's true. Yeah, but people didn't know what to expect with that thing too. 'Cause I think it was kind of the first of its kind as well. So split the audience a little bit with regards to the expectations, perhaps. But yeah. One more that I just want to quickly mention before we wrap up tonight for a slightly different reason, because it's mostly around one key mechanic. I think it's the one we mentioned earlier tonight, and that's Dark Souls. So I think Dark Souls is a massively contentious game and very divisive, but it's divisive mostly from the point of view of the difficulty of the game. Like, there's that huge division between people who think that it should be left as the designer intended when it comes to how hard that game is, and then you've got that other huge sort of split off from that crowd who think that it should have difficulty settings and allow people to actually play it the way they want to play it. So that in itself has spawned a hugely divisive conversation around games of that type, but really sort of centering around Dark Souls in particular. Yeah. So I
think even before the difficulty conversation kind of came to the fore, it was also, I think, just divisive because of the feeling of the gameplay, like it tied into the difficulty. But I remember there were a lot of like critics and people who say that it felt like slow and they didn't like how long the animations go for and that it was too difficult. But but there were other people saying, once you master the system, it's so satisfying. And I think that even just the core mechanics of the game outside of the difficulty, I think made it divisive as well.
Personally, I think that like the difficulty thing is really interesting with Dark Souls, because I think the reason that people want to see it have other difficulty options and that whole divisive conversation happened was because they want to enjoy Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
So it's not the game being divisive so much as a singular mechanic in it preventing some people from being able to enjoy it as fully as they want to enjoy it. And so that creates a whole conversation. And it's a really fascinating one because I'm not honestly sure where I fall on that spectrum, other than what I said earlier, which was that like if Jedi Fallen Order was as hard as Dark Souls, I wouldn't be playing it because it would have just completely, like, I would have been like, nope. But the fact that I can approach it in a way that is a bit easier and I can learn and then maybe try it again at a higher difficulty, that's,
But do you feel like you've missed out now that you do have Jedi Fallen Order? Because now you can scratch that itch with an alternative. So
no, not really. but like I also fully, Jedi Fallen Order's definitely not as hard as those other games. It's just a sidetracking type. But at the end of the day, like the difficulty discussion is a whole different beast. But Dark Souls is a good game that spawned that discussion because of access, essentially. Yeah.
How divisive it is. Yeah.
So I wrote down like a list of, I think, like primary causes of divisiveness. And I think we've hit most of them. There's one I think we haven't covered, which I'll just list off. So we talked about like subsets within existing fan bases. So like people who are already a fan of something, game comes out, they say it's not like the old stuff, or we wish it was more like the old stuff. Other people say it's fine. That creates divisiveness. The like difficulty or just core mechanics. Some people say the game's just not fun, and some people say they like it. I think that, and there's the difference between critics and users. That sometimes there can be a division between how a game scores critically and how users are experiencing it. And there's one I think is the writing of games can be divisive too. So I'd point to David Cage games like Beyond Two Souls and Heavy Rain as divisive games because there are, and Detroit Become Human more recently, because there are people who say, oh, they love how deep it is and the issues it tackles with, talking about race and android rights. And then there are people who say that it's completely hackneyed, bludgeoning you over the face with it. It's like themes 101, like the most on the nose metaphors you can think of. And I think that there can be, whether or not you see the writing in a game as like genius or whether it's like obnoxious, I think creates divisive games as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got in the chat that Nick Guy 23 saying, I think especially for this quartet, battle royales and in particular Fortnite would be a divisive subject. So many people hate them, but they're so popular.
I think it's culturally divisive, that one.
Yeah, and
like it's if you weren't there at the start and didn't get the culture of that game in its current state, yeah, you would probably be like, ugh.
I actually don't think
I would say,
yeah.
To which I would say, okay, boomer. But
I don't think battle royales are particularly divisive for this group, because I think that to a greater or lesser extent, the four of us mostly fall on the they're not necessarily our thing, but we appreciate that they exist kind of angle.
Yeah.
So
because that's kind of like a genre thing, right? Like we don't really play sports games either, but that's not kind of divisive for us. Like we don't really play battle royale games, and there are a lot of people who maybe Nick's right that there is a conversation that people rag on Fortnite quite a lot and accuse it of being like a waste of space, basically. So maybe it is divisive.
Maybe the divisive nature of that is the audience that it attracts is actually causing the divide. So people often don't want their player base sort of saturated with what they perceive to be young kids that are basically making the people they're playing against like more of a trash audience is kind of their view. But yes, I agree that's probably a more toxic angle for a lot of them as well. Yeah,
that's exactly why I say it's more of a cultural divide, because I don't think the game's bad at all, right?
No.
The game draws a specific kind of audience and has a specific kind of culture surrounding it that a lot of people dislike. And so that causes that divide. Like, I dislike the way the game's culture here is. Like, I make jokes about disliking Fortnite. I don't dislike Fortnite that strongly, but then, I see kids flossing and I can't help but be like, oh, God.
I think that it's also, there's some like industry anxiety that comes from Fortnite, where people worry about the influence it's going to have on new projects and like monetization models. So there are people who don't like it for what they think it represents, less so than just what the game is. But I think that could be a whole other topic, I think. So
yeah, for sure.
Any predictions for upcoming games next year that you think will be divisive?
Cyberpunk.
You think Cyberpunk will be divisive?
I think aspects of the story will be, yeah.
So you think like the kind of the writing or themes will be divisive?
I'm actually, the more I see of that game, the more I'm thinking the gameplay might actually be a little bit as well. In terms of the method of sort of perspective and the shooter aspects of the game. I think I get the impression that people are going to think it's a bit different to what it's going to release as, and I'm concerned that's going to cause a bit of a divide. I think that it'll universally be received quite well, but I think that there will be a number of people who... There's some contention around those aspects, at least. Okay. So,
Cyberpunk's already divisive. Like, it's already there. Like, it's not like massively divisive because the game's not out yet. But a lot of the way that certain groups are represented in the game is causing those conversations already.
Yeah.
So
I think Doom Eternal will be really divisive as well, because there'll be like a large portion of people who think that it's the best fucking game ever, and then there'll be a pocket of people that are just wrong. So, yeah.
I think Marvel's Avengers will be divisive. I think that it'll be a situation where the gameplay is solid and fun, but I think the live service nature of the game, or the monetization, or like the structure of the game will be unpopular amongst some people. And because it has that element of something really good about the game that people enjoy, and then I think there'll be something like negative about the game that a lot of people don't like, that mix I think will create a divisive atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. I don't know. Next year's, it seems so far away, but it's really not.
No, just around the corner.
All right, well, speaking of just around the corner, we should probably leave it there because we've got plenty more to talk about next week, which is just around the corner. So that's it. Divisive games. Divisive topic. I'd be very keen to see what other people think in terms of their top picks for their most divisive games that they've experienced or played or sort of seen content on before. But let us know. You can get hold of us through all the usual methods. So if you're not able to watch the show live here on twitch.tv/partyloaded, send us an email to mail@partyloaded.com, hop on Twitter, get us at partyloadedshow, or hop on our Facebook page. You can just find it, facebook.com/partyloaded. And of course, if you have missed the live recording of the episode tonight, you can find all of our content that's not on Twitch over via channelendgame.com, which will also lead you to our YouTube at youtube.com/channelendgame, where we do put slightly more polished versions of all of our VODed episodes up there every week as well, a few days after it goes live. So that's it. Gentlemen, good show. It's been one of those episodes where I realised that, particularly in terms of current games, we've still got quite a few more hours to put into some things before the end of the year. So
I could have probably talked for another hour about Death Stranding.
Yeah, we definitely need to circle back to that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, next week. I already have the... there was another game I was going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about that until next week, because,
Yeah, for sure.
It's going to take a little bit.
Nice. All right, well, let's cut it there. We've run long, but thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
All right,
You're welcome.
That's it. And that's all for tonight. We'll see you next week. Until then, good night from Gudetama, and good night from us. Bye! The Party Loaded podcast is a Channel Endgame production. For this and more great gaming content, bookmark channelendgame.com.